Hello there, people of the internet. How is everybody doing today? I'm doing all right. Thanks for asking. I want to address something real quick, kind of involving obsolete firearms. Now, I know I call them obsolete. There's sort of different definitions of obsolete. The definition that we're going to be using is that this is older technology. Better technology exists to do the same job. That does not mean that these right here are not capable of doing that job. It just means that better technology exists to do the same exact thing. A lot of people will argue that these are not obsolete because they can still keep up with modern weaponry. Well, go out, run a match with a bolt-action gun, run a match with a semi-auto gun of any kind, and let me know what your feelings are after that. So, first things first, I know I kind of went on a little rant at the start of the video, but we're going to kind of switch gears and go to the absolute opposite end. I have seen a lot of people out there who have the mindset of these being obsolete, and yes, I am absolutely one of them. But the people who have the mindset of these being obsolete, they kind of adopt the mindset of these not being a threat at all. They adopt the mindset of these essentially being completely null and void whenever it comes to them causing any sort of issue in the future, assuming that something might potentially go down and maybe somebody has something like this over something like an AR. They just have the mindset that if somebody has something like this over something like an AR, then they're not going to be a threat, and that is just simply not the case. Just because something like an AR exists, that does not mean that these right here lose their capabilities. It just means I understand the AR has more capability, more modularity, better ergonomics. It's a semi-auto platform if we're talking about the civilian ones. If you want to go out and mount optics or red dots or whatever you want onto the AR, it's easier. Ammunition is much more abundant here in the United States nowadays. It is just overall the better option. I understand that. But just because all of that exists, that does not make these less deadly. And that's kind of the premise of this video. So if you want to stop watching now, then there you go. Here's your click-off point. Well, we're going to go a little bit more in depth. This right here, 303 British, this particular one is a number 1 Mark III. You can tell that very easily from the very distinct nose cap that these things have. This particular one, I don't know if I said it or not, it is in 303 British. It has about the same power as, let's say, 7.62 NATO of the modern day, if you don't know what 303 British ballistics look like. It will, for all intents and purposes, fire about a 150 grain bullet at about 2,800 feet per second, which is why I said it's about on par. Rimmed cartridge, double stacked magazine. The newer stuff that doesn't have that chamfer on the rim, you do risk getting rim lock if you don't load your magazine correctly. But if you do everything right, then this right here can still be quite the effective firearm. Just because somebody else has an AR does not mean that you do, like, it does not mean that you lose the capabilities of 10 rounds of a full power rifle being fired downrange at a fairly rapid rate. These Enfield rifles, because of their short bolt throw, cock on close action, etc., can fire at a pretty substantial rate. As a matter of fact, with a little bit of training, people have been able to be essentially on par with the average Joe with a semi-auto rifle, if we're talking about a semi-auto rifle that is in a full-powered cartridge. If you got someone who is not very adept with firearms, which most of your conscripted soldiers are not going to be, and you give them something like an M1 Grand, and then you give an expert something like this right here, who knows how to effectively fire it and use it, and I am definitely not one of those people, but I have seen these used at incredible speeds, then one of these will be the expert will be able to fire one of these faster than that other person would be able to fire something like that in 1 grand. Now you give them the AR-15, lighter weight bullet, lighter weight cartridge, less recoil, etc., especially with something like a red dot on it, that person would definitely have the advantage over that. But if we're talking about just from a semi-auto platform, these right here absolutely stack up with a good number of different semi-autos out there. Now, there are plenty of bolt actions that are not capable of doing that, and you definitely need the practice and the training and the time and the commitment to learn how to run something effectively like that, which I do not have those capabilities of. But just because something else exists does not mean that this right here loses its capabilities. I've seen these ran incredibly fast. They're a full power cartridge. You know, that 303 Brit round is still going to do the same thing to a human body that it did 100 years ago, back whenever these rifles were dominating the battlefields and all the soldiers were using them. I'm not entirely sure how I want to say this next segment. There are other aspects to a rifle being obsolete other than how it actually functions, and the cartridge is definitely one of them. Like, for example, this right here I would consider a more obsolete gun than, say, the Ishapur, which is chambered in 7.62 NATO, like the Ishapur 2A or 2A1. However, this right here is an Oviedo Mauser, and it is also chambered in 7.62 NATO. Technically 7.62 set me, but I've shot just thousands and thousands of 7.62 NATO rounds through this thing, so I know it can handle that just fine. I would consider... that's actually a tough choice, really. I would consider this right here to be a less obsolete firearm just because of ammunition availability. Although its capabilities, its magazine size, its etc., definitely stack it to a lower capability than something like this right here. I would take the Enfield system over the Mauser system just because of the capabilities and speed and whatnot of the Enfield system. If we're talking about comparing it to what you would have to potentially face modern day if something were to go down. However, if we're talking 303 Brit versus something in 7.62 NATO, I would probably take a 7.62 NATO just because of that ammo capability, that ammo availability. I guess they're both fairly similarly capable since they're both fairly similar in ballistics. This right here is one of those, like, kind of arguing points. Would you take the less capable rifle in a more common cartridge, or would you take the more capable rifle in a cartridge that's kind of harder to find? In the what would you call it? Easy times? In the easy times we're currently living in, you can go out and find 303 British pretty gosh darn easily, but in times of turmoil, when things get difficult, that cartridge might be a little bit more difficult to find versus something like 7.62 NATO, which you can absolutely go out and find an abundance of no matter where it is in the world that you are at. That's kind of an argument and a rant for a different story. The main point is that just because other things exist, like just because the, let's say, Ishapur 2A1 exists in 7.62 NATO, that does not mean that this rifle loses its capabilities. That does not mean that this rifle loses its capabilities. Let's say, I don't know, the M1A exists in 308. That's a semi-auto rifle, external magazine, great cartridge, very abundant. You can get a tremendous amount of ammo for it very, very easily. Just because that exists, that does not mean that this loses capability or that this loses capability. Just because the AR exists with all of its stuff that it has going on, just because the AK exists with all of its stuff going on, that doesn't mean that a shooter armed with this will not be able to send 10 rounds of full power rifle ammo downrange very quickly. That does not mean that a shooter with this would not be able to get 7.62 NATO ammunition readily and relatively cheaply. I almost said cheaply, but 7.62 NATO is just not cheap anymore. It's relatively cheap in comparison to other cartridges, like probably about half the price or so if you buy in bulk at 303 British. So definitely one of the better options out there. That's the point of this video. Just because other good things exist that make these firearms obsolete does not mean these obsolete firearms have any less capabilities. If you go out and you get yourself a muzzleloader, that round ball from that muzzleloader will still do the same damage against its soft, gelatinous target that you're firing at as it would have done 300, 400, 500 years ago. Now, if the person's wearing body armor, that's a different topic. In which case, even your most advanced firearms, like, those would be not necessarily considered obsolete, but the firearm type matters a lot less than the ammunition type. Like, for example, if we had an AR and we were going up against people with body armor, and we just had, say, 55 grain lead core full metal jackets, but we had, oh, I don't know, M2 black tip bullet pulled and loaded into the 308 that we were firing out of this rifle, I would take this rifle over that AR just because of its bullet capabilities. The projectile you fire definitely matters. I mean, there's just so many factors. The rifle, its capabilities, the ammunition, its capabilities, the availability of whatever it is that you're going after. There's so many different factors. But just because other factors exist doesn't mean that these right here are less effective. That's the whole point of this video. Thanks for watching, folks. I appreciate your time. Like, subscribe, share. Description below has a link to all sorts of stuff. Go check it out. You guys go off, have yourself a fantastic day. I'll see you on the next episode.
Been a little while since I've done this. Bonnie and Clyde be damned. Poor man's Garrett. It's a shame that bolt-action shotguns aren't more mainstream.